Good evening. Welcome to Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. It is the 28th of January. Joining us on the programme this evening, we have a first-timer on the programme, Clare Adamson, MSP. Welcome to the programme, Clare.
Thank you, Gordon. Delighted to be here.
Okay, we'll be talking to you later, Clare. And also an old friend of the programme, Ruth Watson, who's in charge of Keep Scotland the Brand. Hi again to you, Ruth.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Okay, well, we're going to get on with the coronavirus update as usual. And as of 2 o'clock today, a total of 1,552,236 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, of these, 375,703 were confirmed negative, 176,533 were positive. There are now 1,201 new cases of COVID-19. This, of course, will be an underestimate of the number of cases because not everyone with the virus displays the symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There were 82 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 5,970. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. Of the people who have tested positive, 1,983 were in hospital last night, 142 of whom were in intensive care. The latest UK daily figures published today show that 103,126 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 1,239 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. If you would like to join the conversation here this evening, you can of course do so on Twitter by following us at BroadcastScot and using the hashtag Scotland@7. And now tonight's main headlines, and we'll be talking first of all about the Scottish Budget. Presenting the Scottish Budget for 2021-22, the Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes, today announced support for jobs and skills totalling around £1.1 billion. Job creation is a priority, with measures including a commitment to launch a new Green Workforce Academy to help people to secure work in the low-carbon economy, a £100 million Green Jobs Fund over the next Parliament, £7 million towards making Scotland a world-class hub for digital business, and an additional £115 million for the Young Persons Guarantee. Health also receives funding of more than £16 billion, an increase of 5.3% on 2020-21, along with another £869 million to continue tackling coronavirus COVID-19, including funding for the vaccination and test and trace programmes. This means that over the course of the Parliament, investment in health has increased by £1.8 billion in real terms, more than tripling the commitment to increase the health funding by £500 million more than inflation. To support family budgets, £90 million is being made available for local authorities to freeze council tax. Public sector workers earning up to £25,000 receive at least a 3% pay rise via a £750 cash underpin, while there is a 1% rise for those earning above that amount, but capped at £800 above £80,000. The budget also proposes £11.6 billion for local government, which represents a £335.6 million increase in core revenue funding, including the £90 million to compensate local authorities which choose to freeze council tax, plus £259 million in one-off funding. There's a further £1.9 billion for primary health care to help deliver more services in the community. A further £550 million is earmarked to build new elective care centres and the Baird Family Hospital and Anchor Centre in Aberdeen. £98.2 million has been made available to improve Scotland's digital infrastructure and to deliver access to high-quality broadband and mobile coverage. £711.6 million for affordable housing and £68 million for the first full year of the Scottish Child Payment, tackling child poverty. There's also a new £55 million programme to support town centres and community-led regeneration projects. There will be more than £3.1 billion in resource and capital investment for education and skills, and £567 million to provide the 1,140 hours of early learning and childcare, supporting the implementation of the UK's most ambitious childcare programme. A further £1.3 billion for the Scottish Police Authority, including a £60 million increase in Police Scotland's annual revenue budget, exceeding an earlier pledge of a £100 million boost over 5 years. A further £1.6 billion for rail and bus services, and £100.5 million for active travel to consolidate changes to healthy green travel options seen during the pandemic. A doubling of the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund, helping tourist attractions and local authorities, I beg your pardon, I'll read that again, helping tourist attractions and local communities to make improvements to cope with increased visitors. There's a further additional £27 million to expand woodland creation and associated infrastructure supporting green jobs. Business support remains a priority, and the Finance Secretary confirmed that the Local Authority Discretionary Fund will be doubled to £60 million in this financial year to allow councils to respond to local needs. In addition, businesses eligible for the Strategic Framework Business Fund will receive full Level 4 payments on the 22nd of February, regardless of any future changes in local restrictions. The Scottish Government will also increase the scheme which compensates councils for the loss of income from sales, fees and charges due to the pandemic from £90 million to £200 million in 2020 to 2021. So let me come to you first, Clare. There's an awful lot of detail, isn't there, in this budget? What particularly stands out for you? I understand that your major interests, first of all, are in education. So what do you think is the standout for you in this budget in terms of education?
Well, I think the budget really addresses some of the major concerns for ordinary families, and for me, that's a real plus from it. There's lots in it to support families. So the expansion to 11 40 hours is huge for families, and that will really help, especially those with lower incomes who are struggling with childcare costs. That's going to be a real benefit to them. So I'm delighted to see that continuing and that going forward. There's also support for young people and our universities. 30 million of additional funding was announced to help young people who have been struggling with the results of COVID and having costs associated with accommodation that they're not able to take up this time. So it's really glad to see that the government's recognising that and supporting them. And my own interest is from my own background. Before becoming a politician, I was a computing scientist and worked in the computing industry. So I think the digital hub's are really exciting. I think this is the type of good, high quality, high productive jobs in Scotland, an industry that we can be leading on. And I think the investment in that and the opportunities for young people is to be welcomed.
That sounds like very good news, Clare. I know there's been traditionally a problem, particularly in rural Scotland, with connectivity. Do you think some of this new funding will be directed towards addressing these kind of issues?
Well, I think the business hub aspect of it and the educational hub aspect of it is different. I think the infrastructure one is something we've been struggling with, but of course it's a UK government responsibility, and had we left it to the UK government, we'd be much worse off than we are at the moment. So the government has invested in that, and we are working towards ensuring that digital rollout happens across the whole of Scotland. I think the pandemic has emphasise just how important that is, how much our futures will rely on digital connectivity for all sorts of aspects of life, and we'll see developments as a result of COVID where we might be seeing more online medical consultations. All of these things have to be addressed. So I think yes, we're working towards that connectivity, and we can look to neighbours like Estonia to see just how much of a digital economy for a small nation can be transformational, and I'm really excited to see that coming forward.
Clare, one of the surprising, well, maybe not surprising things, but one of the most obvious things which has arisen throughout the COVID pandemic is the fact that we now do so much online. Do you see the the developments in IT now being driven largely by what we've learned from COVID about how much people can work from home?
I think, yes. I mean, society is going to be changed by this pandemic, and history tells us that. And we'll have made leaps and bounds in certain areas of science, technology. We just see that with the wonderful work that's been done in the vaccines and how quickly we've been able to get to production of vaccines. So it will change the world, and certainly it will change our interaction with one another and how things are delivered. So, from an educational point of view, we'll see much more delivery online of teaching and learning through a digital medium. And I'm sure that's going to be, we'll never go back to the way it was where it would be all, face-to-face development. And I think that's going to be seen across universities. It's going to be seen across our school estate. It's going to be seen as an opportunity as well to access, really high quality delivery of education in that respect. I think the Open University could teach us all about this, because that's been their modus operandi for years and do it so well. And so I definitely think that things will change. But just from a rural point of view, I think many GPs who would have resisted not having face-to-face interaction with their patients now see that a lot of medical support and diagnosis can be done effectively and safely through a digital medium. So I'm sure we'll go back to some of those opportunities in the future as well. And I think just from a point of view of wellbeing and how we approach work, I think everybody now knows that work can be done from home. There might have been a bit of suspicion about that. I came from an industry where, it was very reasonable to be working from home in the IT industry and was quite the norm. But I think for many, many more people, a bit of life balance might be achieved at the end of this by an opportunity to spend a bit more time in the home environment, actually doing productive work.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much, Claire, for fulsome comments on that. Moving to you, Ruth, now I understand that your main concerns were likely to be more to do with the borrowing powers that we could have to make a budget even better than this. Would I be right in saying that this is your take on the budget?
I mean, I think that Kate Forbes has done, as one might expect, a very good job with what she has. I just think that we have no idea of the scale of the financial impact, not only of COVID, but of Brexit. The reverberations that are being felt around Scotland, around Scottish businesses, is just so immense. People losing years of work that they've put in building up, like cheese ports to Ireland. One of our famous cheesemakers yesterday or 2 days ago announced that they were having to stop. The whole market to Ireland now is gone, a market they have spent years building up. You just have to look at what's happening. I mean, yes, we've had 10.5 million for food and drink. That's welcomed by the sector, but that's it. Just how can you quantify the losses that people are? How do you get back a market that is gone for now? And we may well get this big bounce back when people are allowed to go back out again, but more and more we're seeing people thinking, actually, we're going to have a real rethink about Scottish markets and drive forward the move to buy local, to support local Scotland. That again comes right back to why it's so important that we have clear branding on our food and drink, so people can make clear choices to support Scottish food and drink businesses. But it's wider than that. I've got friends who are they're musicians. They have a huge amount of the work that they do across the continent. They're gigging, Scottish music, traditional Scottish culture, Cayley culture, and really the risk of folk like that. That's a year and a half now they've not been able to work. And they're claiming universal credit. There's a 25-year-old keeps phoning them up to ask them how their career's progressing, what jobs they've managed to find. It's COVID, nobody's got work. So what are they supposed to do? They're falling through the cracks. They've got mortgages to pay, and all of those things. And how do you quantify? Their son was due to start his first record label and his first tour last year. How can you assess the financial hit that somebody who it's going to have to start completely again. And the other thing is, I mean, I think the whole thing about our economy, money is just such an artificial construct. It's just, you don't eat money. You do nothing with money. It's just, it's shiny stones or shells would do just as well. And actually, if Scotland had if Scotland was in charge of its own budget, if Scotland was an independent country, and we were able to do these things ourselves, actually you just create money and throw money at it. Universal basic income, that would take care of a lot of things. As long as you take care of the inflationary pressures that would come around, you know what? It's all make believe anyway. So let's make believe that we can look after our own people, and yeah, it's just I think that Kate Forbes is doing a terrific job, but she's doing a terrific job with one hand tied behind her back.
Would you say, based on what you've been saying about the creatives, and particularly people who are working either on their own or supporting themselves as musicians or performers or artists, is there a case, do you think, in the future, if Scotland were to become independent, that there should be some kind of department which deals with those people and assists them when they do fall in hard times? Because we all know that, being an artist, being a performer is a highly risky occupation. And with the expansion in the gig economy, there obviously are far more such people around now. And the way the music industry particularly has gone away from recording and into live performing, the only way really for people like musicians and performers to make money is to actually play live, isn't it? So they really need some form of protection. Sick pay or something like that surely must be the answer.
Universal basic income. Let's make it meaningful and give universal basic income to everybody, and then people can they can live, they can get on with life. Many years ago I went to took my kids, my husband and I took our kids to some caves, the Cave de Grotte in France, and the Neolithic people who lived across the valley from those caves. They had there was evidence of musical instruments. There was significant evidence of art on the walls that we were looking at, and life was good. And it seems ironic that the Neoliths were able to go out, smack the woolly mammoth on the head and go back and make music and just get on with life. And yet, with all the technology we have, we're in some ways life is more stressful and we have less. We've lost a lot. And for all that, I mean, I agree with Clare that working from home has many benefits, and I think that there's real potential from a an environmental point of view to really cut the amount of traffic on the roads, to cut the amount of unnecessary business flights and those kinds of things. But it's a double-edged sword, because not everybody has enough space in their house that they can work from home. For a lot of folk, actually, it's really important to be able to get out of the house. And I think one of the things I kind of keep coming back to in life is the recognition that actually we're apes. We're social animals.
We're sociable.
We need human contact. And you need to be around someone. And I think that there's a lot to be said about those incidental conversations. So, the kind of conversations, the creativity that comes with the conversation as you're wandering to go and get a cup of coffee or something, that's where a lot of the ideas come from.
Interactions. Okay. Well, listen, ladies, we'll have to leave this subject for the moment and move on to the next part of the Scottish Budget, which is supporting the recovery through the tax system. Retail, hospitality, leisure and aviation businesses will all get 100% non-domestic rates relief extended for at least an additional 3 months, the Finance Secretary Kate Forbes confirmed as a part of the Scottish Budget. The continued support for the sectors most affected by the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic will be funded by the rates relief voluntarily returned by businesses, including retailers. For the first time in the history of the Scottish Parliament, the poundage, the non-domestic rates tax rate, has been reduced mid-revaluation from 49.8 to 49 pence, saving ratepayers more than £120 million and delivering the lowest poundage in the UK. In order to protect people's incomes, local authorities are to be given £90 million of funding, the equivalent of a 3% increase on top of the local government settlement, to compensate councils who choose to freeze their council tax. And to deliver stability and certainty from the tax system, there will be no changes to income tax rates this year. During her budget statement, Ms Forbes also set out plans to increase the starter band, basic band and higher rate threshold of income tax by inflation, to freeze the top rate threshold of income tax in cash terms at £150,000, to return the ceiling of the nil rate band for residential land and buildings transaction tax from £145,000 from April the 1st as planned. Also to continue first time buyer relief, which raises the nil rate band for the LBTT to £175,000 and results in a reduction of tax of up to £600. Also to increase the standard rate of Scottish landfill tax to £96.7 per tonne and the lower rate to £3.10 per tonne to ensure consistency with planned landfill charges in the rest of the UK. Now, Clare, often people neglect tax when they talk about budgets, but it is important, isn't it, that in a time when people are, let's face it, facing probably the most desperate times financially that they've ever known, to raise taxes at a time like this would be pretty silly, wouldn't it?
Well, I think, I probably welcome this part of the budget most from what Miss Forbes has managed to do with it. And Ruth was absolutely right. She is doing this with one hand tied behind her back. So despite that, she has managed to make some really big commitments. And she's also said that the 3 months guarantee for the non-domestic rates, she would extend that if UK government would get their finger out and provide the money that they're sitting on at the moment to continue to help businesses. But it's absolutely right. And I think Ruth touched on something really important here about local purchasing power and money being in the hands of people locally, with Tier 4 restrictions that is absolutely crucial for our businesses on the high street. And I think when we come out of this, I hope that more people will be spending their money locally and with things like the provision for 1140 hours and support for families in that way, the freezing of the council tax, that all puts money in people's pockets locally. And I hope that we will see a shift in how the economy works going forward. For all those reasons, that the issue of transport, green issues and improving the environment. But also, I think maybe people will be a bit more circumspect about how they spend their money in the future, having had this period where we actually have a reevaluation of what is important and what we can't do without in life.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Ruth, the tax budget is always something that sounds a bit dry and dusty when people talk about it. Was there anything in this particular series of tax decisions which you think is important?
I think that anything that helps councils out at the moment has to be welcomed. I was listening to something on the news yesterday, which was going into quite graphic detail about the problems that councils are facing. Things that I hadn't really thought that much about. If councils aren't getting money from leisure centres or the usual routes that they might, where do they get the money from? How are you going to make the provisions that you need? So I think that's really important that councils are getting that support. I also think it's really important that people aren't getting their council tax. Getting a break from council tax, especially for some, is going to be really crucial. From my point of view, I tax the rich. Just let's do it. I'm not even necessarily talking about these multimillionaires that live in grouse shooting estates and somehow manage to pay less tax than the local primary school. Oh, okay, maybe I am. But actually, primarily, as well as multi-million landowners who manage to employ clever lawyers and accountants to to avoid paying taxes, and remarkably unjust laws which mean that you can have a massive estate and somehow the more land you have, the less tax you pay. That doesn't quite seem fair to me. But I was seeing that Rishi Sunak is talking about taxing people for the money for the products that they're buying online. Now that seems to be unfair because I went to my local supermarket in the next town along to do my big shop. That's the first time I've been there since before Christmas. I was horrified at how much extra my big shop cost me. I got a small shop, relatively speaking, and it cost me more than my big shop did in November. So that worries me for a start. But it seems unfair. I'm trying to stay away from the shops, and I am buying online as much as I can to avoid going out. And if Rishi Sunak wants to tax my purchases for that, that seems unfair when Jeff Bezos suddenly is a quazillionaire. So yeah. I would like to see let's stop fanning about the edges and let's just get a great big mallet and start doing some social readjustment. Not in the whole. I mean, I'm not talking like going full Mugabe. I'm not talking about sort of like a socialist revolution. Although Chris McCusker, I'm sure, would enjoy that. But let's just level out things and make things a bit more realistic and a bit fairer.
Yeah, I think that. There's something which just dawned on me actually when you were talking about a tax on purchases. Of course, before we joined what was the EEC in the United Kingdom, there was a thing called purchase tax, which was a precursor of VAT. And since we still have VAT, it doesn't make any sense to have a purchase tax, I don't think, does it? Well, anyway, listen, I fell on deaf ears, so I'm going to move on to the next part of the budget, and that is the police funding. And more than £3 billion of investment will support safer, just and resilient communities, the Justice Secretary has said, as the Scottish Government unveiled its budget for next year. There will be a £104.4 million increase across the Government's justice portfolio in 2021-22, with a further £72 million allocated in COVID-19 consequentials. A record £1.3 billion will be invested in policing, including a £60 million increase in the Scottish Police Authority resource budget and an extra £15 million to mitigate the impacts of coronavirus COVID-19. The overall policing settlement will eliminate Police Scotland's structural deficit and protect the policing workforce. Funding for justice and safer communities also includes further support for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Services Delivery and Modernisation Programme, with an increased budget of £343.2 million. Additional funding for the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, the SCTS, taking its budget to £129.3 million. Also increased investment in community justice services to more than £118.7 million, supporting rehabilitation to reduce reoffending and to help keep communities safe. There will also be extra funding to the Scottish Prison Service, including £72.8 million capital investment to modernise the prison estate, including innovative new female custodial estate. There will be £50 million for the Recover, Renew and Transform programme to address justice system backlogs caused by COVID-19 public health restrictions and mitigating the impact of those on victims, witnesses and the accused. There will also be further increased resource funding of more than £18 million for services to support victims of crime and to deliver measures to improve their experiences of the justice system. First of all, to you, Clare Adamson, again, this seems a very progressive budget, and for the first time in many years, Police Scotland will be able to do their job without the millstone of a structural deficit hanging around their necks.
Yeah, I think this is a good time to do this after the formation of Police Scotland, and we know there were unintended consequences of that regarding the VAT that was never able to be reclaimed from the UK government. So I think this settlement this time will right some of those problems that were to do with the formation of Police Scotland, and I think this is the right way forward. We need a responsive and accessible local policing, and it's deeply valued by our citizens, and it will always lie at the heart of Police Scotland's purpose and approach. So I think this is very welcome indeed.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Ruth, briefly, if you would, since we're a little pressed for time this evening, what was your reaction to hearing the new increased funding for Police Scotland?
Well, I noted that the chief of police, I can't remember his name now, is it Ian Livingston? He was tweeting that he was very pleased to see it, and you know, it's good to see that the recipients think that it's the right move. I think the police in Scotland have really turned such a corner. You know, I was a young activist sort of back in the 80s, and I remember the miners' strike. I've actually spent time at Her Majesty's Pleasure in Corton Vale, and so I've sort of been through the justice system in a few different ways, as well as being a reporter and sort of reporting on it. So I've watched it happening, and the police in Scotland have changed. It honestly, it is just so nice to see the way that police work these days compared to the sort of, like, you know, smack him on the head and chuck him in the back of a wagon way that it was. I mean, there may well still be bad eggs out there, but I think the culture has changed, and I think that takes work, and it takes money, and it takes philosophy, and I'm pleased to see that we have a professionalised police service that seems to be working really hard to work with communities rather than at communities. So I think that anything that can be done to try and address, to police in such a way that you don't have to arrest people because you've avoided the situation by good policing in the first place. We've got really brilliant bobbies here where I stay, and they do a lot of work. I mean, one of the mums I know, her son was having real issues, and the local community police officer would pop round to the house and have a cup of tea with him, you know, just to kind of try and help keep him on the straight and narrow. Now, to me, that's really worth funding.
Yeah, the police taking an interest in the people they're trying to help. Okay, moving on now to Boris Johnson's visit to Scotland. Boris Johnson has been slammed for blatantly lying to Scottish fishermen during a campaign visit to the north of the border today. Speaking to the press during the so-called essential visit to Scotland, Johnson chose to repeat false claims that North Sea cod and North Sea haddock will see big increases in quota and a 25% increase in overall quota in just the next few years. Earlier this month, the Scottish Fishermen's Federation wrote to the Tory Prime Minister saying the 25% figure was not true. The Federation's chief executive, Elspeth MacDonald, wrote, "You and your government have spun a line about a 25% uplift in quota for the UK, but you know this is not true, and your deal does not deliver that." Ms MacDonald also described the great deal of anger regarding Boris Johnson's failed promises to the sector. Analysis from the Scottish Government in December 2020 found that Scottish fishing interests would be adversely impacted by the Tory Brexit deal, with drops in the key fishing stocks mentioned by the Prime Minister rather than the big increase which he falsely claimed. Commenting earlier, Keith Brown MSP, the Scottish National Party's deputy leader, said clearly Boris Johnson is rattled. By branding this campaign trip as essential, this clearly is a Prime Minister in panic who knows the Tories are losing the argument on independence. 20 polls in a row have shown that a majority of voters believe Scotland's future should be in Scotland's hands and not Boris Johnson's. Now, Claire, I'm sure you'll be smiling when you hear this story, but Boris Johnson, a lot of people have been puzzled by why he has come to Scotland at all, because he seems to be not only unpopular with the traditional people who would normally find him obnoxious, but also with his own supporters in the fishing industry.
Well, indeed, I'm really not smiling about any of this because I'm only angry about Brexit and what the UK government have done to our fishing industry, done to our exporters, and the damage yet to come that we're only starting to understand to ordinary businesses that are trying to operate now within the constraints of Brexit. He is obviously running scared. He sees the polls and he knows the damage that he has done. He knows it was against the will of the Scottish people. And I think he is just trying to have a fig leaf of essential for something that is a trip that is all about panic. And they should be panicked because the fishermen know they've been lied to. We know we've been lied to about what benefits there would be of Brexit. There's no point in having a quota if you can't get your product to market. And what has happened at Dover and for our fishing industry is an absolute scandal. And we're right to point out that, you know, at the end of this so-called deal that they have, there's no guarantees going forward, and indeed quotas could be reintroduced by the European Union. And it really is a testament to how desperate they are, knowing the damage they have done, that he has to come and pretend it's an essential visit when we all know it's just about trying to shore up the union. As I say, I find very little to seek comfort in any of that, because at the end of the day, I didn't want independence to be because of something like this. I wanted people to make a positive choice for independence, because I absolutely believe and I know that it will be the best thing for the people of Scotland. And it's just so sad that our businesses are having to suffer, families are having to suffer, people are losing their jobs because of this nonsense.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Clare. Ruth Watson, it's as I said earlier on in this piece, it was difficult for many of us to sort of parse what exactly Boris Johnson planned to get out of this trip to Scotland. Could it be perhaps that this visit to Scotland was really not for the Scots' benefit, but more for the Tory voters' benefit back down south?
I don't know that the Tory voters down south particularly care much about what's happening in Scotland, to be honest. I'm looking at the polls. I've been listening to a few really interesting sort of trade types down in England, UK-wide, Europe-wide conversations. And it's very interesting. One of them commented a while back, and actually I saw polling recently which reiterated that very recently, that one of the issues that the right wing in England was facing is that their Brexit narrative about "we don't need anybody else, Yabu, sucks to be you," had actually was kind of blowing up in their face more than they'd anticipated. The message had been so successful that I think 49% of English people polled thought that England would be better as an independent nation. And it's very interesting when you hear the Conservative Party in Westminster referring to Brexit land as an independent coastal nation. They seem not to know or not to care that sounds very different if you're in Scotland. So I don't really know what Boris Johnson's plan is. If I suspect that saying that he has a plan is to exalt his intentions. It may well be that he's just having to go through the motions, and he's kind of perhaps hoping that the people of Scotland will shoot themselves in the foot with endless infighting and the whole sort of the politics of divide and rule, or the sort of there are a number of very interesting strategies that I've been reading, and was it the New Statesman or one of those articles saying one of sort of Gove's union strategists was saying, just delay a referendum, delay a political outcome, and the people of Scotland will tear themselves apart arguing over it. And lo and behold, it seems to be in a murky part of Twitterland. That seems to be what's happening. I'm only grateful that the vast majority of sensible people in Scotland actually don't bother with social media and are just looking at what's going on around them. They're looking at what's happening on the shelves. They're looking at what's happening in their purse. They're looking at what's happening. The fact that their kids are not in school. They're looking wider around them than the tiny box that is our telephones. So I think that to look at Boris Johnson and his intentions, you have only to see that he didn't bother going up to Peterhead, to the fish market there, to see that he knows very well the reception he would get. There comes a point at which one's actions catch up with you, and I think that this time is fast approaching. And if the people of Scotland, and I'm thinking here of the Calcutta Cup, if the people of Scotland drop that ball, we will only have ourselves to blame.
Fair enough. That's a very good way, I think, of a good analogy for the way things are at the moment. Anyway, we're now going to talk again about, I'm afraid, the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party is under growing pressure to discipline backbench MP Sir Desmond Swayne after he refused to back down from baseless claims that NHS capacity figures had been manipulated to exaggerate the scale of the pandemic. Swain, a former minister, refused to apologise after the emergence of a November interview in which he urged a fringe coronavirus deniers group that has suggested the pandemic could be a hoax to persist in protesting against lockdown. The Save Our Rights UK group has also published videos promoting theories of David Icke and Piers Corbyn, as well as an interview in which it is claimed that coronavirus is linked to the QAnon conspiracy, and that Madonna revealed her awareness of the pandemic at the 2019 Eurovision Song Contest. The Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, said that after the Conservatives have refused to act, the Prime Minister must intervene urgently to condemn these comments and take action. It also emerged today that Swain had appeared on the Richie Allen Show, a radio broadcast that has previously featured multiple Holocaust deniers and anti-Semites. The Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove told Sky that Swain was out of order and must apologise, saying that I work with Sir Desmond, I have great affection for him, but I'm afraid he is completely out of order. Despite Swain having already refused to apologise, Gove refused to commit his party to taking any further action. Well, are we surprised by this, Clare Adamson, that a member of the Conservative Party is caught basically promoting conspiracy theories, and no action seems to be taken despite Gove's words?
Well, it's difficult to see how you can expect them to take the right action when their own leader is on a week where we have 100,000 deaths from COVID, thinks it's appropriate to travel within the country as well. And we didn't talk about that aspect of Boris's visit, which is completely unacceptable and sends exactly the wrong message to people about how serious this condition is. I regret very much that people who are in a position of privilege as MPs or who are actually policymakers have such a low view of science and science evidence. And I think this is an example of where it's just not acceptable that people can ignore the facts in front of them, ignore the terrible pressures that have been put on our frontline workers, our NHS workers at this time, and promote this nonsense. And I deeply, deeply regret it. And I certainly hope that it would not happen within my party.
Well, I certainly hope so, Clare. Ruth, what was your reaction to Mr. Swain's amazing pronouncements? Do you think that the Tory party will ever do anything about this kind of thing?
Does the Tory party ever do anything about that kind of thing?
I think it's expected in Tory MPs, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I am sure that there are Tory MPs out there that have an inkling of decency within their rape clause hearts. I think the thing that I find really disheartening is that there are people who have a right of centre perspective who have no home to go to. I mean, I abhor the Tory party. I think that they are descending into, just to look at Sir Swain, you just have to look to see that he personifies the 1940s spiv British National Party strutting. Am I allowed to say ball bag? I'm not sure. But my tolerance of COVID. No, my tolerance of COVID denying, far right, racist, bigoted xenophobes who just, I mean, no, we can't allow this. We cannot allow this to be okay. But the Tory party now is so beyond the pale that there's nothing. I mean, we've got people, thousands of people dying. Hundreds of thousands of people dying that didn't have to die, but they pursued some mad Bolsonaro philosophy, and just there's a pattern. There's a pattern of those the strongmen populist politics. You just have to look at the kind of things that Priti Patel has done. I mean, a woman who basically committed treason in her previous ministerial capacity, and yet in Scotland, I mean, I'm all for ethics, absolutely all for ethics in broadcasting, and ethics in politics, and every. I'm an ethical person, But I do think the way in which, I mean, the Tory party is now something akin to the drunk uncle that you don't go near at Christmas time because he's kind of like drooling, or there's an odd smell emanating from his trouser department. You just
You paint a wonderful
and yet
picture.
you look, and yet that's what I think of when I see Sir Swain.
The mad uncle who turns up at weddings.
you
Yes.
look mad racist uncle.
Yeah.
But you kind of go, oh, but he's okay. But it's not okay. He's a mad racist. Stop listening to him. And yet here, we've kind of, in Scotland, we've got, yes, I want Scottish politicians to be held to the highest of standards. But I'm very much put in mind, when I look at the current explosion going on in the tiny world of the Twitter sphere, that I'm very much put in mind of the fact that we put up with 4 years of Donald Trump in the world, the deaths and the misery and the racism, all those children separated from their families, all that horror. And it was all because people got squeamish about Hillary Clinton's emails. So can we please in Scotland have a look at what's happening and the madness down in Westminster? Have a look at what's happening. Posters and billboards up asking EU citizens, so UK citizens from the EU, to go home. It's not okay. None of this is okay. So can we please just focus on getting Scotland out of this madness and take a real hard look? Because we had Holocaust Remembrance Day the other day, and the point is that the Holocaust began with the ballot box. It began with people spouting hate. It began with people targeting the other. And those poor souls that were tortured and murdered, that was done under bad laws that were passed. The murder of all of those millions of people was legal because of those laws that were passed. Now, I do not say it lightly, but I look at what is happening in the darkest hole of Westminster, and I think we are in a really dangerous place. None of this is okay. So can we please get our fingers out and have a real serious look? Because people will die and will continue to be dying down the road if we don't sort this out now and have a look at what really matters.
Okay, Ruth, thank you very much. Obviously, you feel very passionately about this, and I think it's probably a good place to leave that particular subject while we move on to the next, which is at the UK Government Workers' Rights Review. Now, the SNP has said the Tory U-turn on a post-Brexit workers' rights review is little more than empty spin, and independence is the only way to protect and advance workers' rights. Following pressure from the SNP and trade unions, the Tory Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, has now claimed that the review is no longer happening within the BEIS. But Drew Hendry MP said that the Tory government's damaging record proved that Westminster cannot be trusted on workers' rights. The SNP Shadow Business Secretary said that the Tory government's lies and broken promises to Scotland's fishing community showed that you can't trust a word Boris Johnson says, and workers' rights in Scotland were being held back by Westminster. Following the publication of the Tory Brexit deal in December, the IPPR think tank warned that weaker than expected protections in the deal leaves rights at risk of erosion. In a vote in Parliament on Monday, all 6 Tory MPs, Scottish Tory MPs, abstained on guaranteeing employment protections. Okay, now, 4 in 10 small and medium-sized enterprises are expecting a Brexit trade hit. The SNP has warned that small and medium-sized businesses are counting their losses and are on the brink due to the devastating impact of Brexit red tape and increased costs, barely 1 month after the UK signed its bad Brexit deal. A new polling from Politico has revealed that almost 4 in 10, or 38% of small and medium-sized businesses in the UK which trade with the EU are expecting trade to decrease due to Brexit. Separately, the Financial Times today highlighted a number of SMEs either suffering huge losses or looking to move their businesses to the European Union to avoid the Brexit bureaucracy. The menswear retailer Rivet and Hyde cited examples of the eye-watering cost facing the firm, including a pair of jeans from the store now facing duties and taxes of £88, shipping costs of £23, and a £4.50 courier surcharge and a £5 handling fee. And the founder of the lingerie seller Bluebella said, "We tried to avoid having an EU entity, but now it's unavoidable." Now, we know, I think, Ruth Davidson, that Brexit was going to be bad for business, particularly businesses which need stuff from the European Union or sell to it. But this is happening, I think, much sooner than people may have anticipated.
Is that for me to
Sorry,
come in,
Ruth,
or
I beg your
Ruth?
pardon. I was directing that at Clare. I beg your pardon. I think I said Ruth. Clare, I'm sorry. This question for you. My
I think you
apologies.
said Ruth Davidson, but I'll just leave it
I think I did as
with that
well,
one.
yes. Don't know where
No,
that came from.
I think this is, you know, what we all feared and what we all knew would be the worst aspects of Brexit, and now it's coming home to roost for people. And I think for a UK government to be actually advising people that now they have to have a European base in which to operate to avoid the worst aspects of Brexit. I mean, it's appalling what they have done to businesses. And I just to touch on it, it's all very well if you've got capacity to do that, but for industries like the creative arts, like performers, I know we're seeing the incredible visas they would have to pay just to go and perform in Europe and abroad. It's devastating for the economy. And if COVID wasn't bad enough, Brexit would have been a terrible, terrible blow for everyone. So absolutely, we need to be out of this. And I will make no apologies for the Scottish Government planning for the independence referendum and for seeking that, because we need to be back in the European Union and being able to compete as a small independent nation along with our neighbours who do very, very well in that situation, because the UK government has destroyed our economy through their brash Brexit mania, and we are only just beginning to see the consequences of that, and it can only get worse. And it gives me no pleasure to say that, because as I said, I believe in Scottish independence. I have done since Thatcher destroyed the steel industry in my own hometown. That's what brought me to the cause of independence, and it was about independence in Europe, but it was a positive choice for me. And I really would not want to be going through this under any circumstances. And we need independence to be free of it, and then we need independence for our workers' rights to improve our life chances and our well-being of our country. And I absolutely believe that we can do that with independence.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Claire. Ruth, what was your take on this? The costs involved in selling to the European Union now seem to make it almost impossible for some small businesses to export their goods.
It's not just small business. I mean, it's utter madness. If you look at I spend far too much time on social media. There's some very good accounts out there that actually are really worth watching. There's a lot of very good trade nerds and fisheries accounts, and people that explain these things. The amount of money that it is costing to export to the EU, it is eye-watering, and to get imports in. So you not only got the delays for stuff coming in, you've not only got the delays of our exports going out, but you've got all the convolutions of, if you've got a part that has come from the EU that is a component part of a product that you are making that you then wish to export to Ireland or back to the rest of the EU, then there's endless paperwork. I mean, endless paperwork that has to be filled out that people just didn't know was coming because they were given 5 days notice of it. And so all this sort of shunting, oh well, it's business's fault for not being prepared, that's just a lie. And when Kwasi Kwarteng says that he's going to protect workers' rights on the back of Jacob Rees-Mogg 2 years ago, referring to saying that a Brexit land could have, I paraphrase, but to say that Brexit land could have similar work conditions to those found in Bangladesh, I think we've got a really good idea what Jacob Rees-Mogg, who incidentally moved many of his business interests over to Ireland so that he had a European base because he knew what was coming. But that's only to be expected, given that his father wrote 2 books on how to get rich out of being a disaster capitalist.
Okay, listen, thank you very much for that, Ruth. Always good to hear your background information, because it really sets things in perspective. Anyway, moving on, and the first signs of Brexit trade trouble are beginning to appear. Oh, I beg your pardon. We're going to move to another story. Let me see. Okay, so A Polish abortion ban sets the stage for a women's strike shutdown. A near total ban on abortion in Poland has set the stage for a shutdown between a protest movement known as the Women's Strike and the country's conservative ruling coalition. Poland's human rights ombudsman, who runs one of the few institutions in the country to remain independent from the government, said that the ruling was terrible news for Polish women. The state wants to further limit their rights, to risk their lives and condemn them to torture, said Adam Bodnar. This offensive is opposed by civil society. Although the ruling was handed down by Poland's constitutional tribunal in October, there was a 3-month delay, apparently prompted by fears over the size of the protests that ensued. More than 400,000 people came out to protest in towns and cities across the country, leading some government figures to suggest a compromise was required. On Wednesday, the tribunal issued a justification of its ruling, and the government later published the ruling, the formal requirements for the law to enter into force. The ruling finds that abortion based on the grounds of severe and irreversible fetal defect or incurable illness that threatens the fetus's life is incompatible with Poland's constitution. The government appears to be banking on fatigue over the issue, plus the continued coronavirus-related restrictions to dampen any new waves of protest. Yesterday evening, protesters gathered in Warsaw and other cities, but in much smaller numbers than in the autumn. Almost all the small number of illegal abortions in Poland in recent years were due to fetal defects. Abortion will now only be legal in cases of rape or incest or where the woman's life is at risk. Now, Clare Adamson, this is a very draconian rule, isn't it? I mean, people in Poland are right to be up in arms about this. Women should always have the right to choose, should they not?
Well, I think Ruth's comments about us being wary of what's happened in the rest of the world, when you see rights being drawn back, hard-won rights, whether that's workers' rights, whether that's women's rights, in all of these areas, we should take note that this is a danger that is there, and we have to be very, very careful about it. So I commend the women who have decided to take their protests into the streets or to support what they are doing. But I think what we have to let Poland decide this as a country, and I believe that every country should be allowed to make these decisions, just like we had the referendum in Ireland a few short months ago. And it's definitely something that I regret, and I commend the women for fighting it. But I think it's something also, it shows us that you can't impose this kind of ruling without the consent of the nation that you're in. And I think what we're seeing here is real outrage, particularly from the women. I'm sure it's not all the women, but particularly from the women in Poland about it. So I hope they get to a resolution. I hope it's a peaceful resolution, because I think what's happened in America has shown us how easily things can spill out into real anger on the streets.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Clare. Ruth, taking up what Clare Adamson was just saying there, this appears to be an instance of another fairly extreme government taking a regressive step. Is this, do you think, the sign of a wider sort of malaise in Europe at the moment, with far right and other parties taking control of governments?
I don't think it's malaise. I think that the government was voted in. You have to look at, well, why was that? I've been watching with sort of horror. My kids are really big fans of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and I kind of look at Hydra and I see the far right sort of movement across the world. You've got Bolsonaro, you've got Duterte in the Philippines, you've got Boris Johnson, and you had Trump, and you're looking at what's happening in Hungary and Poland, and I wonder how that has been allowed to happen. And you have to look at the role in which social media and the media, what role that has had to play. As a journalist who, back in the 80s and 90s, I was taught to work to very strict standards. by my former employer, the BBC, and I see that those standards are not being upheld, and I see that they aren't being upheld in the way that I think that should be the case. People aren't handed facts, real truth, and then sort of making their mind up from that. I think that actually we really need to have a serious look at journalistic standards and at the standards of information on social media, and I think that has a lot to play with it. But just on the issue of abortion, when I was about 12 or 13, I was in the Meadows in Edinburgh, and I was handed a leaflet, a pro-life leaflet, and it was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. And my dad was a GP, and I went back and I had this leaflet, this very emotive image of a fetus that was being aborted, and I thought, this is terrible. How can this be okay? And my dad, who became a doctor in the late 1940s, his studies were deferred because he'd gone to the war, and so he was around when the NHS came about, and he was around when abortion became legalised, and he was one of those GPs who would go to people's houses to help them deliver, because that was kind of the thing it was. And he looked at me and he said, abortion has to be legal. He said it's always a tragedy, and he said, if you had ever seen a woman with a septic uterus, you would know why a legal abortion can never be the option.
Yeah.
And that in itself, that my dad was a man of great compassion, and the look on his face meant I knew that he had seen women whose lives were to be lost, whose fertility was to be lost, because they had made a choice which was, nobody takes an illegal abortion lightly. And those women, there were women's lives were lost and unnecessarily damaged and ruined. And nobody has an abortion for fun, you know? And actually, while we're at it and we're looking at Poland and their abortion laws, let's have a look at the universal, the rape clause, and the research that came out recently, which said that women in this country were reporting that they were having abortions because they could not afford to feed their children.
Because of the rape clause.
It is because of the rape clause. Yeah. So I'm looking at Poland. What Poland is doing is appalling. And actually what this government in Westminster is doing is forcing women into abortions. Okay. So there's a huge issue to be held around people's right to choose on many levels.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much, Ruth, for that. A final story this evening, and Domestic Abuse Protection Scotland Bill has passed the first stage debate at Holyrood today. Legislation, if passed, will allow perpetrators of domestic abuse to have their housing tenancies terminated, and that the victims of abuse will be able to remain in safety in the family home. Now, very briefly, I'm afraid, Clare, Adamson, this sounds like a very sensible idea.
Well, after everything I've said earlier about some of my colleagues on other benches, I was really pleased to vote for this evening and to see it pass unanimously in the Scottish Parliament, because it's absolutely about protecting people at threat of domestic abuse, and I think it's a very sensible way forward, and I'm really glad to see this progressing.
Okay, thank you, Clare. And Ruth, I'm afraid you'll have to be equally brief on this one.
Aye. Long overdue. It's fantastic. Really pleased to see it got cross-party support. There's an awful lot of men out there, and it's almost always men in the domestic abuse, although not always, but generally speaking, there's an awful lot of men who keep their partners and their children around with the threat of homelessness, and people don't know what their choices are. This gives people choices, and it's brilliant.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much indeed. Now, we're coming to the end of the programme, and just before we close out today, of course, I need to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland is in the middle of a major crowdfunder at the moment. And of course, we are hoping to cover all the major political events of this year. To do that, we need your help. So if you'd like to become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland, you can do so by going to our website and registering using the website address online at the bottom of your screen now. And of course, if you can't afford to be a regular supporter of the programmes, you can also make an individual donation or volunteer. Anyway, that is about all we have time for this evening, but it just remains for me to thank both my guests, Ruth Watson and Clare Adamson, MSP, and I'll see you again next time. A very good night to you.
Thank you, Gordon.
the Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%.